So now we're going to be in chapter 13, section 1. So let's go ahead and get into that. The standards are 7.2, determine how regions are used to describe the organization of Earth's surface. And standard 7.12, explain ways geographic features and environmental issues have influenced historical events. So we're going to discuss Mediterranean Europe. This is the chapter on Europe. So we're going to discuss Mediterranean Europe, examine the history of Mediterranean Europe, and analyze modern life in Mediterranean Europe as well. The Mediterranean was home to two great civilizations of ancient Europe, Greece and Rome. The mild climate made survival there easier than in other areas, and the Mediterranean Sea also helped with trade. So two of the greatest civilizations in history, the Greeks and the Romans, both were in the Mediterranean region of Europe. This is a mild climate, good for growing things, even though a lot of this is a very hilly type area. There's a number of areas to grow things. It's a good climate to grow things. And so that really helped out with the development of civilization there, as well as the Mediterranean Sea when it comes to trade, because the Mediterranean Sea is going to allow them to trade, especially Rome, which gains access to the whole area surrounding it. If you remember, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the year, that Rome winds up gaining access to all the area touching the Mediterranean Sea, making it what Justinian would later call a Roman lake. And so that's part of the geography of Mediterranean Europe. Just a key term you need to know, a city-state is a political unit made up of a city and the area surrounding the city. It's going to be a political unit that combines the city and the area surrounding it into one. The city-state of Athens created the first democracy. And so we're talking about Greece briefly, and we'll talk more about democracies and things like that when we get into civics after Christmas. In the 400s BC, several city-states fought costly wars with Persia and weakened Greece. And so we see that in the 400s, there's a number of wars that goes on with Persia. This weakens Greece. It makes it not as powerful as it used to be. And basically, this is going to cause them to be under the control of a group of people. The Roman Empire, we're going to talk about now, started off as a republic, which is a government in which the citizens elect representatives to rule in their name. The Roman Empire grew from conquering territory. So what happens is the Roman Republic is developed. It is a three-part government. You have the magistrates, which are the voted on officials, and on top of that was the two consuls. You had the Roman Senate, which consisted of people, and they served for life. And then you had the tribunes and the assemblies, which is where they would vote on the magistrates. So you had these three parts of government that work together, similar to how our government works. Well, with the death of Julius Caesar, who winds up making himself dictator for life, when the Roman Senate tries to overthrow him and tries to take away his power, he basically says, okay, well, I'll give myself even more power, make myself dictator for life. The Senate doesn't like that. That leads to his assassination, which leads to Mark Antony and Octavian rising up to defend his honor. From this, we see a civil war breaks out when Mark Antony divorces Octavia, Octavian's sister, and marries Cleopatra. This is going to lead to the death of Mark Antony and the rise of Octavian as being the sole leader of Rome and the first Roman emperor. As they take over territory, they continue to grow, like I said a few minutes ago, to the point where they take over the entire Mediterranean region. In 395 AD, the empire split in two. This is when Diocletian felt it was the best interest of Rome to split them in half. He felt like it was getting too large to govern by himself, and so he split it in two. The Western Roman Empire grew weak and fell to German invaders. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire lasted nearly 1,000 years later. So just a few things that happens out of this, and this is very, very condensed. Next year in history, we'll discuss these a lot more in detail. But then we get to what's called the Crusades, which is a series of wars to take the Holy Land from the Muslims. This is where the Christians are trying to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims, and so it leads to a series of wars between the Christians and the Muslims. The Renaissance is a renewed interest in learning and the arts, and this is the period of time where you're going to start seeing some of these great artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and people like that comes into power. Not really power, but they come into play at this point. They start inventing different things. You see the artist Michelangelo and some of the great artwork he does. And this is going to be a renewal of interest in learning and the arts. And they go back to the ancient Greeks and Romans and look at some of the stuff they did. And this just really revitalizes the arts during this time. The bubonic plague reached Italy from Asia and killed millions of Europeans. And this is where the bubonic plague is where there are infected fleas that travel on routes, through trade routes, whether it be on boats, getting in crates, getting in hay that they've got on the boats. The same thing with wagons, getting on the backs of wagons. As they're carrying large supplies of things from area to area, they'll get into this to these wagons. These rats will have these infected fleas on them. The fleas will jump off, bite humans, and then infect them with Yersinia pestis, which is the Black Death, the bubonic plague. And it went from reached Italy from Asia, killing millions of Europeans. Some places 2/3 of the Europeans, some places about half. In the 700s, Muslims from North Africa conquered the Iberian Peninsula. They ruled for almost 700 years before Ferdinand and Isabella defeated them at Granada. And so this is going to be big for world history because this is going to allow Christopher Columbus to start his voyages. He's trying to find people to give him money to do this, to give him ships, to give him a crew, and no one's willing to do it. But then when Ferdinand and Isabella defeat the Muslims in Granada, they're willing to take a bet on him at that point. This would lead to funding Christopher Columbus, spreading Catholicism and the Spanish and Portuguese languages all around the world. And we saw that a lot in the last chapter, chapter 10, that we covered, where South America, Central America, Mexico we see the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Treaty of Tordesillas is something that helps spread this as well. And so we saw that a lot in the last chapter. The two halves of Rome would lead to different religious beliefs, the majority in Greece today being Eastern Orthodox, while Roman Catholicism is in Italy, Spain, and Portugal. And Catholicism is still large in these areas as well. Greece and Italy have many ancient ruins, such as the Parthenon, the Colosseum, architectural pieces of art. And I'm covering a lot of stuff in this first section because we're trying to condense the history and the geography of Mediterranean Europe down into about 8 to 10 slides. It's hard to do. And so because of this, I encourage you to look into more of these things. Now, we're going to talk about it more next year in history. We're going to get into Rome with chapters 10 and 11. We're going to get into Greece with chapters 8 and 9. We're going to get into the spread of Christianity and Islam and Buddhism, Confucianism, all these different things next year. But take a little bit of time and do some independent research to understand a little bit more about some of these things. The Colosseum in Rome, architectural pieces of art, these things were all created. Aqueducts are structures that can carry water long distances. It was basically like ancient pipe systems. And the Romans would use this to carry water from the main source to a city where it could then be pumped into fountains, people's houses, and ultimately into a sewer system that would wash it away. For centuries, the region's economy was based on fishing and agriculture. In the late 20th century, the industry started to flourish with manufacturing and automobiles in Spain, clothing in Italy, textiles in Portugal. And in the 1980s, Greece, Portugal, Spain joined the European Union, or the EU, and started trading with other European nations. This region still faces economic challenges, such as Italy's northern region is more advanced than the southern region. The Mediterranean is poor in energy resources, rely heavily on imported petroleum, and that hurts that they have to import that in. If oil supplies were to halt, it would hurt the region. And so They're dependent on a lot of outside forces to keep flowing, and that can become a problem if something was to happen and they weren't able to get the oil supplies or other things that they depend on that they import. Mediterranean Europe saw political turmoil when two dictators, Benito Mussolini and Francisco Franco, took control. Um, Spain is always in trouble with the Basque people as well that live in the western foothills of the Pyrenees. And there's also growth in cities and industries, events such as the Olympics in 2004 in Athens, calling for a need to an extended subway stations and reduce pollution and traffic. So we're looking at modern Mediterranean life. There's a number of things that people are affected with in Mediterranean Europe today, whether it be financial issues, pollution, traffic, overcrowding of cities, things like that. These are all things that Mediterranean Europe deals with today. So that brings us to the end of this section. So we will now get into section 2 in the next video.